welcome to the May 12th Oshkosh Common Council meeting. Clerk, can you please take the roll?
Erickson? Here. Peschel?
Here.
Ford?
Here.
Allison Osby? Here. Krause? Mugrower?
Here.
Palmieri?
Here.
Present 6.
And Councilmember Erickson will lead us in the invocation, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
We ask for guidance tonight as we begin this meeting. We honor the people who have come before us and the original inhabitants of this area, the Menominee and Ho-Chunk nations. Let our discussions and decisions always be for the well-being of all whom we govern.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First, we have the consent agenda. Did we have anyone register for any items on consent?
No, we did not.
All right. Council for motion and a second on consent.
So moved. Second.
Any discussion?
Madam Mayor.
Councilmember Mugrower.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I know Mr. Mauer's back there. I don't really need you to come up. I just want to make I guess, a general statement for you and the special events coordinator, Ms. Snell. I'm thankful we keep seeing some applications on here. I know those are going to keep coming in, and hopefully you and your staff are going to do everything possible and I'm confident you will, to make sure that, if possible, those events can go off without a hitch. And if they need some special accommodations, that we try to do what we can when we can to try to invite those groups still to have their activities here in Oshkosh. So just keep doing good work, and I'm hopeful that the tournament, as well as the music festival and farmers market, are able to go off and have a good time here in Oshkosh safely. So that's all I got on that.
Anyone else? Just a quick question then for maybe Mr. Mauer or Mr. Roloff. On 2195 on the farmers market, it is exciting to see that come through. Just a question as to, do we have any special expectations of what that will look like at this time?
Yes. The farmers market organizers work closely with the county health department, and they submitted a plan to the county health department first, received approval from them, and then forwarded to city staff for review. Kathy Snell forwarded on to all the departments. Police Chief Smith and his staff looked at it. They were very comfortable, and Chief Stanley and his staff were very impressed with the information that was provided for not only for the vendors, but how they're going to try to look at social distancing for the public, having volunteer monitors at each block with communication to keep social distancing at its best as well. So I think as far as staff is concerned, we're very comfortable with their plan at this point.
So you don't see any need for us to, or for them to expand or extend down the streets? They'll be able to manage that?
Yeah,
or will we have to just take it on a week-by-week basis?
I think that they've done a good enough job. They actually have a 10-foot space between each of the vendor tents. Each of the vendors is required to have a double-wide table. So I think they've done enough and limited in the existing space that they have to make sure it's safe and safe for the vendors as well as the public.
Chief Stanley, did you have anything to add to that? You look like you might know.
Just to further what Director Maurer was talking about, also they have reduced the number of vendors. So all the artisan vendors are not being allowed. That they've restricted that to just people that are supplying produce and food. They're encouraging pickups. There's no eating allowed there. So like typically you would be able to get egg rolls or donuts or whatever and eat them as you wander through there. That's not allowed. That they really did a very comprehensive approach to following the state guidelines and the CDC guidelines, to try to reduce that transmission and really keep the social distancing to be in place. So that because of that limited number of vendors, that helps to keep them in that same geographic area that we normally would define.
Sure, sure. Thanks for the extra detail on that. All right. Bob, did you have anything from consent? All right. Please take the roll.
Erickson?
Aye.
Peschel?
Aye.
Ford?
Aye.
Allison Osby?
Aye.
Mugrower?
Aye.
Palmieri?
Aye.
Carried 6.
Next, we have a new ordinance 20-202, amend 2020-2021 fees for alcohol beverage licenses in response to COVID-19 coronavirus emergency. Staff recommends to waive the rules and adopt on first reading. Did we have any comments that came in on this?
No, we did not.
All right, back to council for motion and a second on waiving the rules.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion on waiving the rules? Please take the roll.
Erickson?
Aye.
Peschel?
Aye.
Ford?
Aye.
Allison Osby?
Aye.
Mugrower?
Aye.
Palmieri?
Aye.
Carried 6.
And back to the ordinance 20-202, amend fees for alcohol beverage license. Motion and a second on this.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Does the city clerk want to address the, what the final, oh, we already had the matrix on the former one. Never mind. That was a tiered one, as I recall.
Correct.
Councilmember Ford.
Yeah, just so the public hears. So what we did is we're reducing the liquor license and beer license fees to the minimum allowable under state law for businesses.
All right. Please take the roll on 20-202.
Erickson?
Aye.
Peschel?
Aye.
Ford?
Aye.
Allison Osby?
Aye.
Mugrower?
Aye.
Palmieri?
Aye.
Carried 6.
Next are new resolutions, 20-203, approve purchase of Riverwalk bollards from Pacific Lighting and Standards Company for Lakeshore Riverwalk, $76,846. Do we have any comments on this item?
No, we do not.
All right, back to council for motion in a second.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion. Mr. Davis, did you want to speak to this item? No? All right. So let's take the roll on 203.
Erickson?
Aye.
Peschel?
Aye.
Ford?
Aye.
Allison Osby?
Aye.
Mugrower?
Aye.
Palmieri?
Aye.
Carried 6.
Next is Resolution 20-204, approve amendment number 2 to TID Development Agreement with Merge LLC for redevelopment of parcels H, I, and J within the Marion Road redevelopment area. And I think do we have someone here? Did you wish to speak on this?
Happy to, or I can take questions after.
Okay, sure. Back to council for motion in a second then.
So second.
Discussion. Councilmember Mugrower.
Since Mr. Davis has stepped up to the podium, if you wouldn't mind giving those at home maybe just an update as to what we're going to approve here, the amendment, and why we're doing it.
Yes, the purpose of the amendment is to switch the order and the timing for the 3 parcels to be developed there in the Marion Road area. Those are the last 3 parcels the RDA owns. Parcels H is up at the corner of Pearl and Jackson. I is behind the water tower, and J is the one at Jackson and the river. And originally it was planned that parcel J would be the first building built. In this particular case, it's going to be parcel H, which is the one up at Pearl, largely because the food co-op has put together a project on that site, and the developer is trying to meet their timeline. So they moved H to the front. And due to the uncertainties surrounding the current COVID-19 situation, they've asked for additional time to start and finish the other buildings. In response to that, the city has given them kind of a carrot and a stick when it comes to doing these 3 parcels. We want to make sure
all 3 parcels get built on if at all possible, and they can earn their 25% project costs if they build on all 3, and there's kind of a ratcheting down. If they only build on 1, they get the lowest TIF support. Build on 2 and they kind of get the medium, and if they still build on all 3, they get the original TIF support that the city approved last year.
Sounds good. Is that, the gentleman in the back, is that, you're from Merge?
Yes.
Yeah, I just, personally, you don't have to come up if you don't want to. You can if you'd like. I'll invite you up if you want to speak. But thank you for taking the time to meet with city staff again after we met in closed session, answering those questions and just, you know, conveying the additional information that we had requested and just doing so in a timely fashion so we keep the development moving forward. So appreciate the extra effort.
Yeah, thank you for the comments. Thanks for working with us. You know, we had a plan to start on the river, and we're extremely excited to work with the co-op, and the architectural team has been meeting with them every 2 weeks, and so we're really excited to move forward.
Good. Well, we're excited to have it too. So.
All right. Thank you. Any other questions, discussion? Councilmember Ford.
Just real quick, I'll be voting present on this due to my involvement with the food co-op prior to my council service.
All right. All right, let's take the roll on 205.
204.
I'm sorry, 204.
Okay. Erickson?
Aye.
Peschel?
Aye.
Ford?
Present.
Allison Osby?
Aye.
Mugrower?
Aye.
Palmieri?
Aye.
Carried 5-1 present.
All right, next, moving on is 20-205. Support emergency rule preventing landlords from charging late fees or penalties for missed or late rent payments during the COVID-19 public health emergency and for 90 days afterward. Did we have any comments that came in on this, Pam?
No, we did not.
All right, back to council for a motion and a second.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion. City manager, did you want to just kind of summarize again what this, how this came out?
Sure, I'd be happy to. If you just give me a moment, I got some navigation issues
As I
here.
see it, it looks like there's an open time for comment, and we would be submitting this during that period there's a hearing date on May 21st.
Yeah, there's the Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection, also known as DACCAP, has approved an emergency order, but they want to have some public comment on it, and they're going to be receiving public comments through next Thursday, May 21st. So the purpose of the resolution is for the council to go on record as supporting this emergency rule and to extend it for 90 days after the public health emergency.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Ford.
Yeah, quick question for the city. Have we gotten any feedback from landlords or anybody in that regard to what the impact of this would be? I recognize it's a state administrative rule, so we're just indicating our support or lack of support.
I haven't seen anything, and I'm not sure if community development hasn't either. So no, I haven't heard anything so far.
Okay, thank you.
I will just share that I did speak with several landlords this week, some that I had known for a while and others I hadn't heard from in quite a while, and there was no opposition, at least in those. And as a matter of fact, I was quite encouraged to know that a number of landlords are interested in doing some mediation, even with regard to other light rent issues, and trying to be part of the solution. So that was rather encouraging. Bob, did you have anything you wanted to speak to on this?
I think you actually hit it on the head, Mayor Palmieri. I've been hearing a lot of the same things. Residents, tenants also have been, I've heard some support from this because in my world, we sent out a letter that kind of talked about this, and it brought up a lot of questions in regards to the housing that we provide. And so there was definitely landlord and tenant support for this type of emergency rule.
All right. Can we please take the roll?
Erickson,
Aye.
Peschel,
Aye.
Ford,
Aye.
Allison Osby,
Aye.
Mugrower,
Aye.
Palmieri,
Aye.
carried 6.
Next, 20-206, a resolution of the Common Council of the City of Oshkosh, Wisconsin, requesting an explanation for the failure of the United States Postal Service to deliver absentee ballots to Oshkosh voters for the April 7, 2020 election. I know that council received a number of emails on this. Did we have any additional that came in for registering in advance of the meetings to the clerk?
No one registered, but I did email out a copy of the letter today that I received from Mary Ann Dito at 1915 Fabry Street that will go on record.
Okay, back to council for motion and a second.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion. Councilmember McGrower.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First, I just want to thank City Manager Roloff and City Manager staff. Diane for working with me and him on putting some language together just to put pen to paper. And for those at home that can't read this, in a nutshell, we'd like to know what happened, why it happened, and how the United States Postal Service is going to make sure it doesn't happen again. I think I'll sums up about two pages worth in about one sentence right there. And that we haven't still gotten a formal or really informal response from our United States Postal Service. So we call on our federal and our state legislators to use the full power of all their offices to help us determine what happened and why, and report back to us so that this doesn't continue to happen.
And I might add that there's one particular whereas the city of Oshkosh and its voters are entitled to know the status of these undelivered ballots. At this point, we still don't even know where they are. So certainly. Any other discussion? Bob, you have anything? Just checking in. All right. Please call the roll.
Erickson,
Aye.
Peschel,
Aye.
Ford,
Aye.
Allison Osby,
Aye.
Mugrower,
Aye.
Palmieri,
Aye.
carried 6.
Next is 20-207. Direct city clerk to mail absentee ballot request forms to all registered voters in the city of Oshkosh for the November 3, 2020 presidential election. Again, I do believe we got a number of emails directed to all council, but did we have any additional? that came
Nobody
in?
has registered, no.
Okay. Back to council for motion in a second.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion. Councilmember Ford.
Yeah, I can get us started. Just doing some background research on this. 538, that statistical website, used to be part of the New York Times, isn't anymore. Just came out with a big piece showing that there's no partisan benefit to moving to a mailing out absentee ballots, and that's consistent with other research, more academic research out there. I think it's important for the public to understand that this is not mailing everybody a ballot that they will return to vote. The goal here is to send everybody an absentee ballot application. They'll have to fill out the same form they had to fill out prior if they were requesting one of these in a previous election. They'll have to show a voter ID, just like they would have to. There is situations where you could have somebody that has a voter ID already on file. But in that case, the chain of events for any type of fraud would have to be somebody sent an application to an address where somebody had moved. That person moves, so the person who moves into that house, the new resident, decides they want to commit voter fraud, and it just so happens that they return that ballot that was sent to them. The individual who had moved had an ID on file. So I'm not worried about voter fraud in this case. I think it's more about ensuring that everybody who wants to vote has the capacity to vote safely. And November is a long ways away, but it'll be here. We don't know what the future is going to be, so I think it makes sense to be prepared. There is a cost to this, and the cost estimate we got was about $67,000, excuse me, for the November election. So I think that's important to be taken into account. For me, the cost-benefit analysis is that worth it to ensure that we get more people out there and preventing people from having to make that choice, whether to risk their health or not to have the opportunity to vote. So that's why I support this. Thanks.
Thank you. Pam, just a question. How soon can people actually register or apply for their absentee ballot ahead of that election?
We are receiving requests for the August and November election already, so
Okay.
they can start anytime.
Okay, so this would, in theory, give plenty of advance time for people to request that, so that we wouldn't be running up against, like we ran into in April.
Correct. And our hope is that we will be able to do a merge so that those individuals that have already requested will be able to pull those out so they won't receive a duplicate request.
And then I guess my other question is, depending upon how many people request an absentee ballot, does that determine how many polls we'll actually have open?
At this time, I would still have all the polling sites open because those ballots have to be processed and run through on election day.
So we wouldn't be doing consolidating of polls?
Today, as of right now, no, I would not.
Okay. Any further? Councilmember Allison Osby.
Yeah, I guess, again, I appreciate the intent, and I certainly appreciate what Councilmember Ford has to offer. But given the fact that we do have a very generous amount of time for those to request the ballot, and knowing that we have significant reserves, or revenues that we're not seeing, it's not that this comes out of a CIP budget, it's not where it comes out of surpluses of TIFs, but actually out of our operational budget. I do think that there is ample time for those to request and to have it mailed. I think there's certainly, as I talked about the last council meeting, for a fraction of the cost, could certainly educate the public so that they do know that they can request those applications now. Also, too, we discussed, that we know with the moving of some of the temporary house, or those that live in temporary housing, we know that a portion of that cost is something that's not going to be, certainly not going to be able to be taken advantage of. So for those reasons, I will be voting no.
Well, I think we were making an assumption when we talked about the potential for the temporary housing or the dorms, that not everybody would be back, but certainly is it move-in day for those who are returning in August, I believe?
Well, I think, and that's part of it. I mean, like right now, we're passing this now when we actually don't know what's going to move forward. There was some talk, obviously there was at the Fed level where one of the scientists had indicated that perhaps school this fall was a bridge too soon. So what does that mean? Mm-hmm. And again, a lot of the leases either start like June, July, or August. So the chances of those that were registered voters that were living in off-campus housing, again, potentially are not going to be in the same residence.
Councilmember Ford?
Yeah. First off, thank you, Councilmember Allison Osby. Those were all very fair points. I know that the document that was sent by the city clerk showed 2,200 folks living in UWO dorms. Of course, if they're not, right, if the fall semester isn't open, I assume that those don't have to be mailed. I know that I had reached out to some folks at the university regarding sending out communications to let individual students know that they need to change their address, or that we're doing this to really just get the word out there. So I do think that I agree with you. I mean, right, there's going to be, this is part of it, there's going to be people that get an absentee ballot that is wasted. But I think that we can be proactive about minimizing that.
And I believe that it was on Sunday, the president of the UW made the announcement that they were intending to have classes return in person in the fall. And so we're having to almost proceed as if that is the case, until, as things are so fluid, we do have to be adaptable. Councilmember McGrawer?
I do want to, but I also know Mr. Postal was one of the authors of this. I don't know if he wants to speak first. I'd be just fine with letting him go first. So.
Councilmember Peschel.
Sure. I guess I want to stand by the initial need for creating this. It's to provide the opportunity for those that want to plan ahead, making it easier for our community members to be able to get that application and for them to make their choice on how they want to vote. Not to vote, but in which manner they wish to vote. So to me, it's really important to be looking at some of the data that they're showing in regards to a second wave of illnesses and pandemic that may take place later this summer or later this fall. So that is in my mind, the reason why I was supportive of bringing this forward. And I will stand by that because I believe that there is real science data behind that suggestion that there's still more to come. So to me, it's a public health issue to allow and to give a peace of mind to voters to be able to know that we are taking that initial step for them. So I guess I have some questions in regards, maybe not some questions, but comments. I believe that, this speaks probably against my feelings on this, and that's fine, but it's not just students that change addresses and change locations. That's right now we have a very transient rental population already. So, so do I think that that's an indicator to not do something like this? I don't think so. I think that there's still enough information out there to encourage and educate those that move or are not here to be able to find ways to register their vote, whether it's still absentee or if they end up going to the polls. So that's all I have at the moment.
Councilmember McGrawer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I know I voiced several concerns at the last meeting regarding this potential program, and all those still ring true for me. I read part of this resolution here, and whereas the City of Oshkosh desires to encourage voting through absentee ballot and to provide all registered voters with the opportunity to cast their vote in the November 3rd presidential election. And I read that, and I want to break up a few parts of that because it's inferring that we haven't already encouraged absentee balloting or absentee voting, or that they don't currently have the opportunity to cast their ballots. I would. Oshkosh is an extremely progressive community in terms of voting. This last election, the city staff, the clerk's office, and then every department that also shared every message did a fantastic job in educating the public for a very low dollar amount, by the way, in terms of getting people the ability, or to remind them that they had the ability to use an absentee ballot. So they did not have to go to the polls if they so chose. And that is their right. If they, in Wisconsin, you have the ability to, it's a no fault or a no reason absentee ballot. You don't need to tell anybody why you want one. But everyone in the City of Oshkosh already has that ability. We have early voting. We instituted Saturday voting. You can email, you can do your online requests through My Vote. There's ample opportunities for people in Oshkosh to receive an absentee ballot for all elections. Whether it's just one individual one, or as the clerk indicated, you can easily click a button and it will just send it to you for every election that year. It's a very easy process. I know not everyone is connected to the internet. I respect that. But there are other mechanisms other than this program. The way we did so in this last election, how we handled this last election, the clerk's office, it was very safe. To my knowledge, there was not one case of community transmission through that process. I'm not advocating that we continue that process, but all I'm saying is that, to my knowledge, that our clerk's office did a fantastic job preparing their staff to have as safe as an election as possible, and that this measure just is not needed in the city of Oshkosh. We do a lot already. I have some concerns with the actual the wording of this too, though, for the authors of it. One, at the last meeting, I think Mr. Peschel wanted something for the August and the November election. Mr. Krause only wanted the November election. My memory could be off on that, but this is written only for the November election. Does that infer that the August election is less important? Because to me it does. If you're saying that this is only for the presidential election, which does have a very high voter turnout and probably will have 85 to 90% registered voter turnout, is the August primary election less important? So why isn't it included? That would be one of my big questions, as well as this was not crafted fully. There is no explanation for how they're going to pay for it. This is a operational expense, as Councilmember Allison Osby indicated, and I would be extremely surprised if this was a one-time expense. If we do this in this fall, I would anticipate and expect that either the people will then want it further, or that there will be council members that would like it further. So that's now a recurring expense that somebody needs to fund. And if you're looking at this on an annual basis, that racks up some significant costs in terms of operational costs. And we're in the people business, so the only place that comes from is cutting people. So I don't know how they're going to pay for this, either in the short term or the long term, to administer this program.
Councilmember Ford.
I have a couple of questions for City Manager Roloff. Councilmember Mugrauer asked, or mentioned that the advertising was relatively inexpensive for the previous election. Just curious how much that.
It was slightly under $3,500 for the advertising.
Okay.
There were two in the Oshkosh Herald, and that pretty much was the limit of our advertising. And then we just did a lot of online social media stuff to do it at no cost. And staff time, there was a lot of sweat equity with staff, and we were real proud of the work they did.
Okay. Now, to really put you on the spot, so presumably we wouldn't be funding this by laying somebody off. We wouldn't be funding this by cutting a personnel position.
I view any of these costs that we're talking about right now as still COVID related. I can't guarantee you that we'll get reimbursed for it, but I think we're doing it in response to the emergency. So I have every intent to direct the finance staff to submit that, and that's Mr. Van Gompel's expectation as well. We'll see if that works, because we're going to be submitting a lot of things for reimbursement, but that's our plan. Along with what we did with April, I have every intention of turning those bills in as well.
So what I'm hearing is we'll try to get this reimbursed. There's a chance that we won't. We'll take a bath on it. And I guess to Councilman Mugrauer's question, I'll answer, at least for myself, that this to me is a resolution that is being brought by the time we're in, COVID-19, the emergency. So I'm not passing this or considering this to be an ongoing expense. That will be for future folks to figure out. I'm talking about right now for the November election. That's where I'm at.
Can I just say that, my spouse was one of the people who, for the first time in his adult life, was not able to cast his ballot because he actually requested it prior to me requesting mine. I got mine, he didn't get his, and was not going to put his health at risk. And that was representative of many, many phone calls and many emails. And I don't know that you can put a price on the fact that those people who were not able to vote without putting their health at risk, this is the very least that we could do. I'll be supporting it. Councilmember Mugrauer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I guess to rebut that a bit, to that point, and I respect that, because like I said previously, I myself requested an absentee ballot, did not receive it, so I chose to go to the poll, completely my choice. This does not fix that. The only way that fixes that is if Wisconsin goes to an all-mail-in voting system, which isn't going to happen anytime soon. So this does not fix that, and to insinuate that this does, it's an error. All this does is get more paper pushed out earlier on, but it does not fix that part of the problem, which many people do have a problem with, and I respect that that individuals do not want to go to a poll. Fully respect that choice, but this won't fix that. Thousands of people requested them well in advance and didn't get them. This doesn't fix that. So.
Councilmember Ellison Osby.
Thank you. And I think to tag off of that, I think it also sends a message as well that, you know, if this is truly about risking health, August would have been included in this. Because again, August primary isn't any less or more important than April. April's not any less or more important than November. November obviously is a big issue. It's a big year. And I'm certainly not advocating for the expense for August, but in something like this, I guess the message should be consistent.
My question for the clerk then is, would the letter that is inviting the application also reference the fact that they can do that as well for August? No, because it would be going out after?
Mm-hmm.
I would wait until after the August election before I actually sent out those request forms. We would start educating the public, but I would wait until after August so that I could get those individuals that registered at that election included in that mailing.
Okay. Any further discussion? Bob?
Yep.
Councilmember Peschel.
Thank you. So, I guess Mr. Mugrauer and Ms. Allison Osby, I completely agree myself with providing this to August because it is that important to me. I'm prepared to make a motion today to make it to doing that. So the reason this wasn't written in that way is because at our last meeting, the consensus was that there was more people maybe comfortable with the November election versus doing both of them. So I conceded to not including August, even though I feel from a public health perspective, it makes sense to include August. So, and I guess, you know, with that intention, I'll make a motion to add the August 8th primary to this resolution. So, because to me, it is a public health emergency and providing that option for people to do that.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Councilmember Allison Osby.
So I have a question. So based on currently how things are, the Safer at Home is supposed to expire May 26th. So does that mean the health emergency is over or just the Safer at Home is over?
Just the Safer at Home.
But the health emergency continues.
Health emergency would continue both statewide, nationally,
okay,
as well as locally.
That's what I thought. Okay, thank you.
And truly, you know, we briefly discussed that the city would continue its state of emergency also. Mm-hmm. So for us to say that we continue to have that emergency in one area, but then in another area say we don't, that, to me, that further obfuscates the issue. But I'm sorry, Councilmember Ford. Councilmember Mugrauer.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. City Clerk Ubrig, for the August election, when is the soonest absentee ballots will be mailed out? Do you have a rough date or even an exact one?
I have an exact one.
Excellent.
I will need to have those out June 25th.
Okay. And just for our own reference, the November election, when would those need to be mailed by? Or when would they start going out? Sorry.
They will start September 16th.
And then one more question for you before I make one more comment. How long will it take you or your office to prepare for the mailing of this? So if you need to start mailing them June 25th, backdating that, how much time would you anticipate would be needed by you and your staff to mail out 33,000 envelopes through the system.
We will be meeting probably this week, looking at logistics, staffing, getting our ballot order ramped up so that we have all the information to get out in a timely basis. But it's going to take some time.
Do you have the capacity and the capabilities to make sure that that can get met? Does your office have that ability?
I will need.
Look my way, Pam.
I will need Mr. Roloff's encouragement of help.
And we discussed that already. This would be beyond the normal capacity of the city clerk's office, and we'll do what we did in April. We're going to put all hands on deck, whoever's needed. That's what council wants. That's what we're going to do.
Councilmember Ford.
Yes, would fellow council members be open to including language in the resolution that makes the mailing contingent on there still being a health emergency declared in the city?
Well, let's take Bob's motion that's on the floor first, the amendment, yes. And then can we come back to that?
Sounds good.
All right. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. All right. So Councilmember Peschel's motion to amend is to include the August primary election, a mailing for that and for the November. So let's take the vote on that piece first.
Erickson?
Aye.
Peschel?
Aye.
Ford?
Aye.
Allison Osby?
Aye.
Mugrower?
Aye.
Palmieri?
Aye.
Carried 6.
Okay. Now, Councilmember Ford.
Yes, I'd be interested in making an amendment to the amended resolution that ensures we only mail the ballots out if the city health emergency is still in place.
The city or the state?
The city.
Or both? Okay, the city.
Because we know, right, we know that the state, the safer at home order is scheduled to end May 26th, as we just discussed, so, and we know that
But
the city.
the public health emergency continues beyond that, though.
Okay.
That's what I believe City Manager Roloff was saying.
Yes, I believe that to be the case. That's only
Right.
the safer at home order that's due to expire.
Because we don't have any thresholds at this point that tells us when that dial's going to change.
Okay, well, thank you. Then it should be for the state public health
Okay,
emergency because
okay.
we're a creature of the state.
All right. So do we have a second on that?
Can I have clarification? Is this for both elections?
Correct. I'd want that, yes, I
Okay.
would support that language. I recognize that obviously you have the timeline where you have to mail the elections or mail the ballots when you need to mail them. So it doesn't imply that the emergency would be, it's theoretically possible, right? The emergency is lifted after you mail the ballots, but I'm talking about at the time. You don't, if it was lifted and you got up to the time where you would be mailing them, you wouldn't be mailing them.
Okay.
So do we have
Mayor,
a
may I?
second? Councilmember Peschel.
Sure. So I'm going to ask you to repeat it again just because I'm losing things in translation again.
Sure. So far what we have is the amendment that you offered passed, and then we have an offer of an amendment to include language for both the August and November that says subject to the state of public health emergency still being in place at that time, and the state public health emergency.
Okay.
Did you get that?
Thank you for the clarification.
Sure. I still need a second.
Second.
Discussion.
Real quick, since
Councilmember Ford?
I introduced it, the intent here is, of course, not to, if this is an emergency expense, and as the resolution states, the first whereas is talking about the COVID-19 outbreak, that if we are determined that this is no longer an issue, if the state comes to the conclusion that it's no longer a public health emergency, we don't need to take an action contingent on public health risk.
Thank you. Councilmember Erickson.
Thank you. For city manager, would there be a situation where we would decide to keep the city's emergency passed when the state's emergency is lifted?
I would say yes. I could see it going earlier or later, but your question was, could it go later? The answer is, it's quite possible.
Okay.
All right, please take the roll.
Erickson,
Aye.
Peschel,
Aye.
Ford,
Aye.
Allison Osby,
Aye.
Mugrower,
Aye.
Palmieri,
Aye.
carried 6.
Okay, next we have council discussion, direction to city manager.
Nope.
and
Well, wait,
usual-
we just-
I'm sorry,
Main motion.
back to the main motion. Those were the 2 amendments. I was doing so good keeping track of all that. All right, back to the main motion. Motion and a second then on the main motion.
Already
I have
that.
it.
All right,
Just need the vote on 2207
as amended with the 2 amendments. Councilmember Allison Osby?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I appreciate the 2 amendments. I think, from writing the resolution, based on indication a few weeks ago as well as today, I'm sure this will pass just fine. But again, now with both, certainly will increase the cost probably to closer to, Ms. Uberg, about 90,000?
Sure, yes, close.
Yeah. And while I appreciate, and I do respect the opinion of that, we want to make things as easy as possible. Certainly there is the debate of privilege and rights regarding voting, and with any privilege or right also comes responsibility. And so again, I am of the thought that we didn't have a broke system prior up until this April election. And it is extremely unfortunate that we had both a pandemic as well as a tremendous error by the U.S. Postal Service in which we've have not received any response nor an apology. But I don't think that warrants at this time, again, because of an emergency and loss of revenue, spending $90,000. So I will still remain a no.
Councilmember Mugrower?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Actually, I'll be echoing Councilmember Allison Osby's statements. The amendments, they do improve the resolution. They do make improvements to it, but not enough to change my opinion of the original intent, as well as the lack of need for this particular extra expenditure and extra efforts. So I'll still be voting no for the program.
All right, thank you. Now let's take the roll.
Erickson,
Aye.
Peschel,
Aye.
Ford,
Aye.
Allison Osby,
Aye, or no?
no.
No.
Mugrower,
No.
Palmieri,
Aye.
carried 4-2.
All right, next we have council discussion and direction to city manager and future agenda items. Just a reminder, at our last meeting, we did make some amendments to council rules. So this is just for giving direction and approving those rules as we amended them at the April 28th meeting.
Take a motion.
Motion for, and second from council.
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? Just checking in on you, Councilmember Peschel. Please take the roll.
Erickson,
Aye.
Peschel,
Aye.
Ford,
Aye.
Allison Osby,
Aye.
Mugrower,
Aye.
Palmieri,
Aye.
carried 6.
All right, next we have councilmember announcements and statements. The only thing we have listed here is our report of council liaison for boards and commissions. I'll start. So from the Redevelopment Authority, since we did have a meeting prior to this, the closed session, I won't repeat that. I'll go on to the East Central Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission. Just 3 highlight items. They continue to search for a new director. Eric Fowle is no longer with East Central, and that there is a still pending negotiations with Allegheny County as to their continuing participation with the commission. And they also discussed some scope of work changes. The only other one I had was Bike and Pedestrian Committee. They did have to cancel the Bike Oshkosh event, sadly. That was very well attended and grew every year. Part of it was, as well as, concerns for safety and health, also concern about the number of volunteers, because it does take quite a bit of volunteer folks to put that together. That's all I have to report. Councilmember Allison Osby, do you have anything?
Unfortunately, my committees have not met, so Madam Mayor, I do not have a report at this time.
Okay. Councilmember Mugerauer.
Nothing.
Councilmember Ford?
Same
You're
here,
not
have not
yet. And I don't think Councilmember Erickson, did you have transit?
Nope.
Nope,
not yet.
okay. All right. How about you, Councilmember Peschel?
Sure. I attended a Parks Board meeting virtually last evening. So the majority of the meeting was we discussed the updates to the capital improvement plan for 2020. And we discussed, 2020 through 2025. So we went over those and prioritized those items because that's something that we're going to need later this summer when we start talking budget and CIP. So Parks Director Maurer spent some time going over the impact of COVID-19 on parks and other department operations and events. Spent some time talking about the development that's going on at Lakeshore Park. And Assistant Parks Director Mr. Dahlman gave several project status updates to several of the work that several projects that are being done in the parks at this moment. They indicated that right now is turned out to be any kind of an efficient time for Parks Department employees to be doing work in the parks because there's not as many people utilizing playgrounds and pavilions and stuff, and so it's allowed them some extra time. And then there was also a report on some new animals being brought to the Menominee Park Zoo. And that's all I have.
Thank you. All right, next we have city manager announcements and statements. Turn it over to you, Mr. Roloff.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Robbie's going to come up and give a little overview of the 2020 sidewalk rehabilitation program. And this is probably more a general overview than anything else. I know some residents have called or emailed a few council members, and some questions came up, and I thought it would be appropriate for Mr. Robbie just to give you a little overview. And he does have a PowerPoint presentation that I think he's going to pop up the screen or
and I just want to thank you too, because I know we had so many emails that came in asking about this right now, and it may be a little bit repetitive for you, but so many people emailed about this, and I just wanted to make sure that we got a real thorough explanation out to everyone.
Yeah, I think, kind of the entire overview of the program is something from a staff level at the engineering division. We've been looking for them to try to get put together, and with the number of questions that we have been receiving, as well as the council has been receiving, it really provided a good prompt for me to get the staff to finish that kind of informational packet. This entire packet that was emailed to council earlier this afternoon should already be available on the city's website. Worked with media services earlier this afternoon to get that information posted. It'll be in the resident information section on the main Public Works Department page. So right there at the top of the Public Works page, this information will be available. So just a little bit about the program. This program is an annual program designed to split the city up into approximately 10 sections, so we get through the entire city on approximately a 10-year cycle. Some cycles have been a little bit longer depending on the number of issues that we found, and we've had to maybe cut back a little bit here and there to due to the available funding that we have. But it's an approximately 10-year cycle, and really goes through to evaluate the condition of all the public sidewalks in that rehabilitation area and replace those that are not in compliance with our standards, which are based primarily on the Americans with Disabilities Act standards. The Americans with Disabilities Act does require public entities such as the city and transit agencies that anytime we do public facilities, we have to comply with those requirements. It also requires us, when we do retrofitting or reconstruction, to bring those facilities up to current standards. So while something that may have met the standards 10 years ago when we went through last time around, the standards have changed and may not meet the standards anymore. So we have to continually stay on top of those standards and make sure that, as we go through the rehab area, that we are bringing those sidewalks up to compliance with those standards. A little bit of a bit of a summary table of contents of where everything is in the upcoming pages. Some of the primary things that we look at: cracking, deflection, defective service conditions, walk that is not straight or in alignment or located on the right-of-way line per the municipal code. There are a number of reasons that can happen, but as we go through, we fix those where the conditions no longer apply. Settling walk or walk that is raised, cross slope issues, and then most recent addition to the annual sidewalk program is condition of driveway aprons. That addition came as a result of a lawsuit that we were involved in. So just some examples of some of the cracking issues that you can see. You've got the first one on the left, some pretty significantly damaged walk. In the middle, you've got a long longitudinal crack right down the middle of the sidewalk. And then on the far right, you've got just a single crack going all the way across the sidewalk. Probably a little bit hard to see if you've got a black and white print like I do, but those are some of the defect issues as far as cracking goes that our sidewalk inspector is looking for as he goes through and walks the sidewalk area. Some questions as it relates to cracking. Certainly one of the things that our staff get asked a lot is, well, can it be sealed with caulk? No, it can't. The integrity, the structural integrity of that sidewalk has already failed at the point that those type of cracks come all the way through the surface. So a caulk sealant is not going to resolve that issue. It's just going to continue to separate, and it will start deflecting as well. As water gets through that crack and you go through freeze-thaw cycles, it will start to deflect as well. Deflection is probably one of the biggest complaints that we get, primarily due to the tripping potential and tripping hazard that it creates. The ADA indicates that a ½ inch of deflection or more requires work to be done to correct that. So here are some examples of some various amounts of deflection. A lot of questions that we get is, how do you measure that deflection? We worked with our machine shop at the wastewater plant, and utilizing their calibrated machinery, they actually cut a gauge for our sidewalk inspector to be able to go down and test the deflection at each, and if it hits the sidewalk square adjacent, it's in excess of that ½ inch. So utilizing the machine shop, we cut several gauges for our staff to be able to utilize to measure that crack deflection, or that joint deflection. Some of the questions we often get, can a properly grind the sidewalk? You cannot grind the sidewalk. However, there are some contractors in cases where they may be able to come in and cut that deflection to provide an adequate deflection and adequate slope to meet the requirements of the ADA. There are some contractors that are capable of doing that level of work.
Do you mean kind of like trim? And when you say deflection, for folks at home, do you mean like heave?
Yeah, visually, if you will, your sidewalk joint should come together like this, smooth. Deflection is when they separate vertically from each other. So as you're walking along, you can stub a toe and trip. Right. So a person using a wheeled walker or a wheelchair, that deflection gets to a point where it becomes difficult for them to utilize their mobility devices on those sidewalk squares.
Or in the case of kids who are skating or rollerblading or skateboarding.
Or any number of other things, yes.
Sure. But when you're talking about cutting, that some contractors are able, they can't grind it down, but they can like trim it. Is that what you're saying, and make it more like right. a ramp instead of a...
As a property owner, you could not go out there with your angle grinder and just grind that deflection away. But there are several contractors that have larger pieces of equipment that will, instead of trying to cut that deflection in just an inch or two, it will take a much longer section and cut. And in some cases it may be grinding, but it's grinding over such a length that it creates a situation where that sidewalk square will now be compliant. But you're not going to be able to go out there with your handheld angle grinder and make a compliant square. In any case, a work and right-of-way permit would be required for that work. Any work within the public right-of-way requires a contractor to be licensed and bonded and a permit to be obtained from the engineering division office. There is no charge for work and right-of-way permits. The cost to become licensed with the annual license is $20, and the bonding, depending on what type of bonding, most contractors take out the annual license. The annual bond, as our staff have talked with contractors and their financial institutions, usually about $200 for an annual bond. And that covers all work that the contractor would perform during the course of a year if it's the annual license.
Councilmember Ford?
Yeah, is there a list of licensed contractors? That's a question I've got. People upset that they have to use the city's individual, and you get the letter in the mail that says you can use somebody else. How would a resident know where to go?
I will have to check and see if that list is published. I know certainly the engineering division office can provide a copy, a list of the contractors that are bonded and licensed to do right of work, but I will have to check and see if that list is available on the website. If it's not, it wouldn't be able to be a live update, but we could periodically have a printout updated, I would think.
Yeah,
so.
that'd be awesome.
And,
thank you.
And I guess my follow-up question to that is, when you're talking about the right-of-way permit, so if am I correct that a homeowner could do the work themselves? And if so, would that require them to go through this bonding and right-of-way and
Yes.
bond and all of that
Yes.
as well?
Yes, the purpose of becoming licensed, bonded, and obtaining a permit
Is to do
make
the
sure
right-of-way work.
is to make sure that the work complies with the minimum standards that we have established to be safe within the public right-of-way.
Okay.
Some other frequently asked questions that we get regarding joint deflection is, can those sidewalk squares that are deflected be mud jacked? The answer to that is, as long as there is no other deficiencies with that sidewalk, yes, they can be mud jacked. Again, it requires a work and right-of-way permit and a case-by-case review by our inspector to make sure that the sidewalk squares to be jacked are not otherwise damaged.
And part of that too, if I understood, like if a piece or a section is lower, it can be mud jacked. But you can't mud jack something that's higher, lower. Is that right?
Correct. The process of mud jacking raises the settled squares. It does not lower a raised square.
Because it puts like a buffer material underneath, right?
Yeah, what it does is
they shoot it in there?
They cut 4 holes through the sidewalk panel, and then they pump a grout into the underneath area, forcing that sidewalk square up, and then they patch those holes.
Okay.
So I've seen it done effectively. In a previous cycle, my neighbor had it done with a square that was deflected, and that was the only issue with it. So I've seen it done effectively, and it works. Again, we talked a little bit about the determination of the half-inch deflection and trip hazard. You know, as I mentioned, we had our machine shop over at wastewater cut several gauges for our staff to use. Another question we often get is, well, the sidewalk squares aren't broken, it's just cosmetic, so why are you charging me to replace an ugly looking square? Well, it's not cosmetic, it's not because it's ugly. Once that surface wears off and the aggregate underneath is exposed, that sidewalk square has surpassed its useful life. With exposed aggregate like that, you get a rough texture. So again, anyone using a wheeled mobility device or a wheelchair, they will be subject to vibrations going across that rough textured surface, and you get to a point where that is also a violation of the ADA. So it's not just because it looks bad, it's because it's failed and the texture no longer meets the requirements of the ADA.
Does that, when it's got that spalling or whatever, does that also make it more difficult to clear snow?
Certainly it would, because a rough
to
texture would be more difficult to, you know, if you're out there with a shovel, it would certainly be more difficult to clear. Some of the questions that staff have received over the years is there a way to fix a square that's got a surface issue like that? And there really is not. Thin overlays do not work in the outside area. Your first freeze-thaw cycle, boom, those overlays are popping off and coming loose, and you're right back to where you were. So there is not a way to patch a defective surface situation like that. The square just has to be replaced. Some examples of misaligned sidewalk. You can see here, in most of these cases, the misalignment was due to an obstruction that was behind the walk previously. Most commonly, large trees that were located just behind the walk. When the walk was installed, the walk kind of jogged around them so the tree didn't have to come down. Now, here we are in the future, those trees have died or been cut down, and now the walk just needs to be straightened out and put back in alignment. Excuse me, as I mentioned, the municipal code does require the back of walk to be located right on the right-of-way line, so it's bringing these sidewalks into compliance with the code. Again, kind of touched on that a little bit while we were talking about the pictures as to why we are replacing those squares. A little bit of sidewalk heaves and raises or settles and lowers. As we mentioned when we were talking about some of the mud jacking situations, for settled sidewalk squares, most commonly this is over a utility trench. If there are no other defects, those squares can be mud jacked and brought up to eliminate that sag or settlement in the sidewalk. However, in the case of a raised panels like that, there's not a way to lower them and bring them into compliance, so those are removed and replaced.
So, Mr. Rabi, you're describing a lot of the situations where squares need to be replaced. One of the questions that I got is, if somebody did want to hire their own contractor, how would they know the detail of what the deficiencies are in order to communicate that to a potential contractor?
They can coordinate that with our sidewalk inspector, or they can have their contractor coordinate with him.
Okay, all right.
That's a lot of what he does throughout the day is field phone calls from property owners asking questions about the sidewalk squares that are marked.
Okay.
I know he spent 20 minutes in my office earlier this week, and I think about 18 of those 20 minutes were fielding phone calls from people asking questions about their sidewalk squares. So that is a lot of what he does. Now that he's been out and gotten them marked, most of what he does right now is answering questions, because the rehab area is not currently being worked on because property owners have until the end of May to get work done by themselves. So the contractor right now is currently working on water main break patches from the winter and things like that. So he's fielding those phone calls right now.
Do they have an extension of that time frame when we have, like this year, where we've had an extended freeze period overnight, given that the concrete and freezing aren't the greatest maybe mix?
Generally speaking, if they've got the permits pulled by the end of May, we don't require the work to be done.
Okay.
It's certainly, if you're one of the first squares out, you better be having those permits at a minimum pulled. But generally speaking, if those permits are pulled and we get a schedule, he will skip over those. The caveat being, if they're not done by the end of the season, he's going to be coming back.
Sure.
Cross slope is another issue that is frequently brought up. It's something, again, when you look at it, well, there's no trip hazards, there's no joint deflection, there's no breaks. Why is this sidewalk being removed? Well, the shortest answer is the ADA has both minimum and maximum slope requirements. So if the sidewalk square exceeds the maximum or is less than the minimum, it is not in compliance with the ADA, and we have to bring it into compliance with the ADA. So as you can see here, the slope requirements of ADA are between 1% and 2%. So it is a fairly narrow window, but that's what the guidelines and rules we're given to work with, and that's what we have to work within. I mentioned earlier one of the most recent additions to the program is driveway aprons. That was as a result of a lawsuit. So driveway apron condition is something that's been added into the sidewalk rehab program because they are going through the city on a systematic basis. So driveway aprons that are sunken below the sidewalk or below the adjacent street need to be fixed. We utilize the street pacer rating system as an evaluation tool for driveway aprons as well, and anything that's classified as a 3 or less is considered failed and replaced. Unimproved aprons, so gravel aprons, have concrete aprons installed. Again, the other picture, it's sunken on one side by the street, raised by the sidewalk. So again, it's getting rid of the similar types of defects that we see in the sidewalks, but bringing those driveway aprons into those the same type of rules. So again, we mentioned 3 main criteria: if it's sunken or raised more than 1 inch, if it's gravel or unimproved, and as I mentioned, we utilize the street pacer rating system as an evaluation tool for determining when a driveway apron has failed. Just a quick summary about how the pacer looks at street conditions, and like I said, as we apply that to the driveway aprons. And then, aprons are a point of ingress and egress to properties, but as they are within the right-of-way, they're capable of being utilized by everyone. Therefore, we have been directed to bring those into compliance and address those issues through the sidewalk rehab program. And that is all I have on the kind of informational spiel, if you will.
Do we also have on that webpage a lot of the questions that came out of some of these emails, and periodically are what color marking represents what deficiency, or if it's replaced or if it's good to go, the green, orange, blue thing?
Green dots are denoting sidewalk squares that are going to be replaced. Other colors are typically denoting other, for example, in the fall, water distribution staff will go out and you'll see blue marks or blue X's. They're just marking on the sidewalk or on the street where the water curb stop shutoff is for that property, so that the sidewalk contractor knows, okay, yeah, I shouldn't just drive my truck through here, or I'm going to destroy a curb stop and I'll have to fix it on my own dime. So the blue squares are denoting, or the blue X's are denoting where curb stops are. The green dots are the marks for getting replaced. Other colors, we do have the Digger's Hotline kind of color code up on the engineering division page, so you can see, red is electric, orange is communication, yellow is gas, green lines in the street are sewer, either sanitary or storm, blue lines are water. I'm probably missing 1 or 2, but that whole list.
So
is
that's up on that page?
Yeah, it's on the
Okay.
engineering webpage.
All right. Councilmember Grauer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Actually, Mr. Robbie, I only have one question for you. Because I know we're on a roughly 10-year schedule for our sidewalk replacement. Now, I know the community of Green Bay just very recently finally enacted a sidewalk replacement program. They didn't have one. So they just finally, it was either a 12-year or a 15-year cycle they're going to. Do we choose to have a 10-year just because that's the choice somebody made at some point and we've stuck to it? Is there an insurance implication if we had a longer one? I ask for other reasons, because we've had obviously lengthy discussions over the past 2 years regarding special assessments, which included sidewalks too, but in ways to figure out a way to reduce our annual expense for that program. You don't have to answer me tonight. A follow-up at some other point would be fine, but why do we have a 10-year when other communities can choose to have a longer one? And if we did have a longer, what might the implications be? I know Mr. Grinninger in risk management might need to weigh in terms of insurance implications. There might be some ADA stuff, but if you could follow up on that at some point for me.
Yeah, I certainly don't have anything off the top of my head. I don't know if
I didn't expect.
If you have anything off the top of your head.
Actually, claims come through our office, not the risk management, and this was a recommendation. I don't remember how it
Predates
was.
me.
Yeah,
It's been in place
quite
for a very
some
long
time.
time. In my research, it has been.
But we had discussed that during the discussions about special assessments, and if we scaled it back even, 1 or 2 years to an 11 or 12-year schedule, divide things up into 11 or 12 areas, there would be risks associated with that because those are out there. And the whole, the end of the presentation where James showed you the driveway aprons, that's happened since I was here. We took that case all the way. Did it go to the Supreme Court or did it go? But it went to Court of Appeals, but it got published, and a lot of cities in the state are now doing driveway aprons because of that. So you got to kind of take a look at how long your program is going to be effective, and if we're getting failures. And when you have street trees, I know this from experience, when you have street trees that are with narrow terraces, they start tearing up the sidewalks a lot sooner, and those are challenges that you have to look at as well.
And
you wouldn't mind just before you get there, because I'm going to go there too. So if you wouldn't mind just reporting back to something, if you find anything, if you can, is there a benefit, is there an ability to go do a little bit longer cycle? It might be what you anticipate the negatives beyond that. And my second one actually would be really more under Mr. Maurer's purview. It's under forestry with our terrace tree planting. One of the main culprits in heaving of those sidewalk squares is not only is our ice in our winters, but it's also our trees that we have planted in our terraces, and we have a tree planting program that puts trees in terraces. Are we not just perpetuating the problem by planting trees in our terraces and then forcing homeowners to pay for the damage that those trees then cause, years down the road?
I would say that if you take a look at the benefit of the trees to the community and the environment, stormwater, and I'm sure James would attest to some of the studies out there as far as stormwater management. I know Bill, our city forester, works closely with, if there's a narrower terrace, we put in a smaller type tree. If we have utility lines above us, we put in some lower growing trees. So we look at the width of the terrace to help minimize that. I think we've learned from the past on what to put into the terraces and what might affect the sidewalks. I think we're doing a better job of that as well.
Okay. Appreciate it. Thank you.
No, that was,
yep, I'm good.
You read my mind.
Okay. Thank you, James. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions of James? I know there's a lot of info there, but you got a lot of emails, so I knew that.
I think he covered it.
It's probably worth the investment in time.
For those who didn't email, and didn't get the response that we, thank you for putting all the time into that. I know that comes up as each section of the city, and I'd be interested to hear, whether or not we have the opportunity to change that scope of time as well, or whether or not it's beneficial or not.
As far as other things, item 23, I'm going to defer a little bit to council members Mugrauer and Ford, because they participated, or at least listened in on last week's county personnel and finance committee meeting. We did forward the council resolution to the county, and it was put on their agenda, but it was not put on as an action item, which disappointed me a little bit. But there was a good discussion about it. It probably took over an hour discussion, so I will give the county credit for having given it certainly a vigorous debate. Because it wasn't on the agenda, there wasn't any specific action taken by the committee, but it looked like they were ready to hold a special meeting to perhaps recommend it, and then they decided not to. And I guess Mr. Mugrauer and Mr. Ford were listening, so I'm anxious to hear their take. And I don't really think I've talked to either of you, so I'm anxious to get your take on what you heard. I can't say observed, but certainly heard on that regard. And then I could fill you in on anything else that these two might.
Yeah, I mean, from a policy standpoint, what stuck out to me was the concern that large taxpayers, corporate tax-paying entities would use this as an opportunity to delay their tax payment to improve their books. Personally, I find it unlikely that any of our major corporate citizens would default, not pay their taxes. I think that the cost benefit on that would not be in their favor. So I thought it was unfortunate. I think this was an opportunity for us to provide a little bit of relief to our residents the same way we're doing it. Well, we did it earlier today for our businesses with the liquor license thing. I thought there was some openness there, perhaps. People were willing to sign an affidavit saying that they're taking this because of delaying their tax payment because of COVID-19 specifically, so given a chance for people to be accountable, but curious what Councilmember Mugarauer has to say.
No, it was a lengthy conversation. I think Mr. Roloff's right. I think it was about an hour and a half. It was definitely interesting to listen into, and just how their form of government works a little bit sometimes. I think that's the polite way to put it. What was nice was that not only was Mr. Roloff on the call, Mayor of Neenah, Dean Coffer, was on there. I don't remember I think there was one more mayor potentially on the call but didn't speak. I don't remember. But then he also had basically the proxy of I think Menasha Fox Crossings. That they were in similar sentiment to us and to Neenah, that basically the municipalities, the four larger ones of the county, were requesting some assistance for their taxpayers. I know the county executive expressed some concern for some of the logistics in terms of he himself thought that there might be a window of time where they may be short on cash at the county level if this did occur. Looking at some of those numbers, I find it hard to believe as well, but I wasn't given the data he was using to make that observation, but I'm in agreement with Mr. Ford that I find it hard to believe that a high percentage of our corporate tax citizens or corporate property owners would be choosing to take full advantage of delaying all those payments that far. It wouldn't be that they'd be defaulting, it's just the way it was worded that it would push them back to a point where the county might be strapped for a bit of cash. I think some further analysis and better detailed analysis might be beneficial. Disappointed that the board, the Finance Committee chose not to do anything to try to advance this to the county. Full county board for their consideration. I think there are some people on that county board that like to have a wider discussion at the full county level, not just the 5 members of the Finance Committee. So I was a little disappointed in that, definitely, that kind of fell on deaf ears, that it may die there for lack of interest at just those, basically for lack of having 3 yeses, that it doesn't come to the full county.
Can I ask about that, though? Because I, too, had a couple of conversations with some folks from the county, and another county board supervisor was indicating that he was under the impression it would still come to the full county board, that it just didn't have the support and the recommendation, kind of like when something goes to our advisory committees, they can recommend or not, but it was my understanding it would still go to them.
My takeaway was, since it wasn't an action item, there was no action that they could take voting it up or down or putting a comment to it. So
apparently some county board supervisors became aware of it. One of the county board supervisors on the Finance Committee is also a council member with the city of Neenah, so she was very aware of kind of both sides of the issue. And that's Supervisor Spellman, I believe, and she and Supervisor Norton from Oshkosh contacted various counties that had adopted this, specifically Dane County, Rock County, and I believe Milwaukee County. And Mr. Van Gompels also reached out to Milwaukee County as well. And they've asked the county clerk to place it on next Tuesday's county board agenda, in spite of the fact that the committee didn't take any action. I wasn't aware that they had that capability, but they've exercised it. I just before the meeting, I received an invitation because it's a virtual meeting, so I intend to virtually attend and basically speak to Resolution 20-191, which the council adopted. The thing that got caught, everybody got stuck in the weeds on, can the county or can we be required to ask people to sign an affidavit similar to the affidavit you sign when you get the lottery credit for property taxes? You're required to sign an affidavit saying it's your primary residence, in a nutshell. And Mr. Van Gompel had been in touch with some folks at the city of Wauwatosa, and they were working on that. That issue, and I think both Matt and Mike were listening in, and that just got so garbled up that there there are definitely imperfections in Act 185, which was the state legislation. Nothing perfect comes out of these legislative sessions, but one of the things is it didn't necessarily provide for that type of affidavit, but it didn't prohibit it either. So I think some of the cities are saying to their counties, can't you put in something? We're willing to require people to come in and say, would you like a waiver? You need to fill out this affidavit saying that, you know, I'm having a rough time and I'd like some help. And as Mr. Ford said, it's going to be awfully tough for a public corporation to sit there and sign a little affidavit saying they're having a little trouble, because that's going to have impact on their stock price and whatnot. So that they're not necessarily going to do that. But I can assure you that our finance staff has been called by regular residents, people like you and me, who have very quickly fallen on some hard times, and they were calling us before March 31, and we couldn't, and city attorney checked it out, we couldn't do that waiver until the state adopted that law. So the March 31 deadline came and went. Some people didn't pay. The numbers went up, and I think Mr. Harris was concerned that that would portend that suddenly there'd be a rash of people that would not pay. The challenge for the county is they have to settle up with the city and the school district and the vote tax. So they're temporarily out of that money until they collect it from the taxpayer. And that's the way the rule is written. We don't, and I'll say it, they hold the bag. And I acknowledge that because that's the truth. And we don't hold that bag. That's just one of the things. Sometimes the city gets a short end. The county definitely gets the short end of the stick. But given the fact that everything is back to regular as of October 1, it's really giving folks a couple extra months to get this done. In my estimation, Mr. Van Gompels, and obviously council, because you adopted the resolution, a couple months can't be so bad. We just gave up $70,000 tonight with the liquor licenses. We didn't have to do that. Council chose to do that because they know the hurt that's going on. This one is one that's going to, Mr. Harris is saying it's going to benefit businesses. It absolutely can potentially help businesses, but it can also help residents. And I think one of the council members said at the previous meeting, isn't there something we can do for regular residents, not just businesses? And this is one of the tools we have. We have to apply it to everybody, but it still applies. So I plan on attending next week's, or virtually attending next week's county board meeting to speak in favor, and hopefully some county board members will see it similarly.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I think it's worth reiterating too that City Manager Roloff was very grateful in thanking the county for the support they've given thus far in our efforts to respond to COVID-19, and you expressed a willingness to compromise and to work with them to make this work, and I'm sure that you'll bring that same attitude to the full board meeting. So that's all I have to say.
And I do have a resolution from Dane County that I think what I'll do is I'll forward it to council so you get an idea of what other counties did to address that issue. Madam Mayor, did you have an,
I'm good.
So that's that. Thank you very much. The other ones will be a little shorter. Inactive licenses. We were due to bring back to you some inactive liquor licenses from establishments that have been inactive for a while. I just made the discretionary call. I don't want to bring them back to you now. I just think that's right now. It was somebody on Oregon Street. The construction was going on last year. If you gave them back their liquor license today, it'd be worthless. So we'll bring it back at the appropriate time, unless there's some concern. But we've got some liquor licenses that are still being unused, but obviously they were going to be rendered useless as of March 17 anyway.
How many are inactive at this time?
Oh, you're putting us on the spot. I looked
sorry.
at Pam on that one.
Yeah. About a handful that are inactive, but they're in various stages. The one that Mr. Roloff mentioned is the one on Oregon Street that came up to the level that we're discussing it now.
Okay.
And we discussed, and we just said, that's add an insult to injury.
Sure.
We can wait. If we had a bunch of people come in line for council to award them a liquor license, it's like, here, put it in your drawer because right now it's worthless. So I didn't think it'd be worth coming to you. So that's that one. Outstanding issues is on your, right there in your agenda packet. A couple things I want to point out. Free student busing, because of what's going on with the schools without having summer school, Superintendent Cartwright and I have talked about changing the effective date to September 1. And it would be September 1 then to August 31. It would still be 2 years, still be the same terms, but given the fact that we're not encouraging students to jump on the bus right now for the summer, one of the biggest destinations during the summer is the Boys and Girls Club, which is also closed. The second biggest destination is the Y, also closed. It didn't make a lot of sense to doing it. And Councilmember Peschel and I had discussed it. And Bob, are you available to comment on that as well, about the September 1 effective date?
Yeah, that's something that we started to discuss this last month as it related to all of the shutdowns that took place. It makes a lot of sense to do that. And I know that the superintendent was also interested in changing those timelines as well. So
if I could just ask a little more on this. So council decided we would do July 1, but you're saying that you and Dr. Cartwright have decided it would be September?
The council had given me direction to work through some minor changes. So yes, Dr. Cartwright and I discussed the impracticality of having free student busing when we're not encouraging people to jump on the bus. So we felt it would be appropriate to move it to September 1. So I can certainly bring it back if council feels strongly that it needs to get back to you. But that changes the terms because we want the money 30 days prior. So the money changed 30 days prior. Nothing changed. It's still a 2-year agreement. All that was changed were the effective dates.
Gotcha. So Councilmember Peschel, did you say that you were supporting this?
yeah, I'm supportive of this action.
Okay.
So I've just to add on to that a little bit too, I've reached out to several of the community agencies that were involved in this, and again, they've indicated that they will support whatever direction our bodies move forward with. So.
Well, thanks for working on that. So that means that if a student wanted to, or had, let's say they had lined up a summer job miraculously, and they were planning on utilizing that, they would not be able to, is that?
That would be correct.
Okay.
The good news is that the summer of '22, that same or a similar person in that situation will still have that service available through the summer. So it's sort of come see, come saw.
Right.
2 more items I want to point out. Oshkosh Avenue Bridge is still progressing. Everything we're hearing, they're still looking for the mid-June opening, so we're going to keep watching that and looking forward to that. And then lastly, the mayor and I met this week to go over some details on the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. It'll be possibly at the next meeting. If not that, definitely the meeting after. The mayor and I are working on the sort of the whereas stuff, but the structural formation of the committee was fairly easy once we'd done the research and we had some prior discussions on it. So I feel very good that we'll be bringing that to you very shortly. And let's see, COVID-19 update. Chief Stanley's here. Obviously, we want to have as much dialogue, answer any questions as possible, but I want to fill you in on a couple things. The mayor had asked me, in terms of fiscal impact, I think Councilmember Ford also asked me. Mr. Van Gompel was putting together some information for the League of Municipalities as well, and also for our presentation to Moody's, which I'm sure the #1 question that Moody's is adding to their repertoire for every community in the country this year is, tell us how COVID-19 is impacting you. So I'll give the chief a minute to get ready to make whatever statements he wants. But through April 30th, we were already down 1.8% on overall general fund revenues. And I'll send you the slide so you don't have to jot this stuff down. We estimate a revenue shortfall right now of 1.1 million in our general fund budget based on COVID-19 alone. COVID-related expenditures to date have only been about 56,000, but we project an additional expenditure of at least 250,000. So you're looking a little over $300,000. Taking together, that impact is $1.3 million to $1.5 million in fund balance, because that would cut into our fund balance. Now that's the bad news. The good news is that council didn't take any action on the $1.7 million surplus from 2019. I said I'd be coming back to you in June, or at least after the emergency's over. I think we should wait on that. I think we got to keep our finger on the pulse of this thing. Things can continue to change. I'd love to tell you that this is a lock solid number, but it's only May 12th. We got a lot of months ahead of us. So I don't want to overcommit to something, but I think Mr. Van Gompel has looked at the COVID-19 expenditures and revenues, but there's other things that might happen. So far, for example, building permit revenues are actually pretty good compared to prior years. So I think people are home, they're like, well, I might as well get it here while I can watch the contractor do the work. So we've got, house improvements still going on. There are other things still going on. Price of gas is great, so we'll have great savings in that regard. It was a relatively mild winter. Salt may not be as bad. And all those things will come into play. We'll certainly, when we start doing our budget workshops in July, we'll have a pretty good idea of where we are, and we'll find out exactly what direction the COVID-19 virus is going in. So I wanted to share that information with you about financing, and I'll forward you this slide because it's going straight into the Moody's presentation, because we know they're going to ask, and we feel it's appropriate and necessary for us to be upfront about that. Chief, did I give you enough lead time to?
I think so.
All right.
Before he goes there, can I just ask one quick question on the slide? I don't want information now. You're going to send it. If it doesn't include, some sort of breakdown in terms of, you're saying $1.1 million revenue shortfall, where are our biggest shortfalls coming from? If it details those types of things out, even just rough strokes. I don't expect a full 1.1 down to the dollar, but just.
It's not on the slide, but it's relatively easy. I mean,
if that information could be provided, just because that's, when we're looking at budget things, it's good to just know where they're coming from, where those expenses and revenue losses are coming from, even in the interim. So I appreciate that.
One of the things it does not include is we've heard nothing from the state on cutting our 2020 shared revenue. That could change everything, and that would be drastic. This is manageable. I mean, relatively speaking, we got a 1.7 million surplus, and we may lose 1.5. We may balance out in the short run on that, but if something were to happen to shared revenue, the discussion completely changes.
Will we have like a recession plan or other plan Bs?
When we come to council in July with our budget workshops, what we normally do is provide some modeling for how we think the budget's going, and we'll just put a few more assumptions into that, because, and that's going to be very fluid. I know some communities are putting together estimates now, but I would say every one of those is accurate as of today and subject to change, and everything I just shared with you is still subject to change because this is an ever-evolving situation. But by mid-year, we'll have a fairly good idea of what some of our more reliable revenues are, as well as our variable revenues. And the variable revenues are the ones that scare us, because those are the ones that they do vary from year to year. They're very sensitive to economic swings.
One more thing, if you could provide this information too, because it is tied to all this. Tourism dollars, we have debt that's tied to room tax dollars. Obviously, room tax dollars are not going to be flowing in. Our position, our exposure, if you could report to us either by the next council meeting or just an email too, whatever, just in terms of where we're looking at and any risk that we have in those avenues. Appreciate that too.
I will be happy to do that. Yeah, that's probably the most sensitive revenue we have. It's not in the general fund, but it has an impact on debt.
Yes.
So we'll look at that as well.
Appreciate it, thank you. That's the last of my interruption questions.
All right, excuse me, good evening. We continue as Emergency Operations Center and as a city to closely evaluate the pandemic. We're starting to see more and more of the state thresholds for gating being met, increasing in ability to do testing, and testing in our region. So optimistic about what that will yield. Clearly the biggest news of the day or news of the week was from the governor's office allowing retail to open back up. So we've worked closely with several of the key stakeholders in the community, like the city staff, the Convention and Visitors Bureau, the
Chamber. I had conversation with the Chamber of Commerce president this morning about this issue and gave him some take on our take on it.
So we're
as well as Go EDC.
Yeah, that we're advocating that they follow those best practices that are put out by the CDC and the WEDC and the Badger Bounce Back Plan and all those subject matter experts. We continue to keep a very watchful eye towards Madison to see what comes out of either the governor's office or other state legislature or the Supreme Court, and be prepared to adapt accordingly. So initially we'd spend a lot of our efforts on planning. We still have a lot of concerns around mitigation, as this pandemic continues to unfold, and as we continue to navigate through these uncertain waters, but we're able to shift a lot of our thoughts and efforts towards recovery. That as we are starting to reopen and starting to have businesses open and have more ability for the community to move around, what does that look like? To support that, City Manager Roloff was talking about revenues and expenses, and we're through our finance department and through some of the other departments within the city looking at reimbursement mechanisms from FEMA, and Department of Homeland Security and the state. We're coming up on this week and next, some application deadlines that we're prepared to meet to ask for some of that reimbursement. So some of the things that we talked about in prior council meetings about, what does recovery look like in reimbursement, we are certainly exploring those options, while we're still under this disaster declaration of, what do we need to do to see this through to the end. So that's, I think, the nuts and bolts of it. I'd be happy to answer whatever questions you might have.
I just have a question. So these are good news. How quickly can we reverse if cases were to shoot up, cases and or deaths were to shoot up?
Yeah, that's a grave concern of, not only mine, but many people around the state and the nation of how do we put that genie back in the bottle. And I think that's going to be incredibly difficult. I think that's part of the concerns that that our local state, state government and our federal government has of, can we reverse, and how will society tolerate that? I think that's why it's so important that we have a measured approach, and it's not just the flip of the switch like we've talked about several times. If we just go back to fully open, how do we shut back down? And that's for me personally, what I worry about is all these past 2 months of effort that we've all done and got to this point. We don't want to completely lose all that ground and start from scratch again. And that's very worrisome. That's why we're trying to do such a methodical approach, and to work so closely with agencies and even internally on messaging about following best practices and continuing to do the things, the recommendations from January, February, March haven't changed, of stay 6 feet away, that avoid meetings. If you're sick, stay home, wash your hands, don't touch your face, all those things, that many of us are tired of doing. We can't just stop doing that and go back to the way it was. We have to have a gradual withdrawal, and that's why the intricacy and the depth and detail of the planning around the farmers market. It's going to look very different than the farmers market we saw last year. As we open up restaurants and bars and even stores, it's going to look very different than than it ever has before. But how do we make sure those measures are in place and those measures are communicated so that we can do some prevention around that? Because, pendulum to swing all the way one direction to try to bring it back here, I think will be very, very challenging.
I do have one more thing to share with council relative to this. It's a letter that I put into your packet this evening, and it's very encouraging. Because we're planning for reopening as the safer at home order gets released, even though the emergency won't go away, we still need to manage this, as the chief has said. And we have to ensure that just because the safer at home order is gone doesn't mean that we don't still practice some safe health practices, distance, and whatnot. I had an opportunity to arrange a meeting with representatives from the Oshkosh Winnebago Tavern League and the Convention and Visitors Bureau, including their chairperson, Chris Larson, who is also on the board, the state board for the Wisconsin Restaurant Association. And we had a very good discussion about what things would need to happen for us to open up when the appropriate time comes. And there's a lot of people that are antsy out there, and we want to try to accommodate them, but at the same time, we have to ensure that safety is being followed. The Wisconsin Restaurant Association has put out something called the Wisconsin Restaurant Promise, and staff had an opportunity to review this, and we feel it's pretty thorough document that addresses both what restaurants can and will pledge to do under this, as well as things that are going to be expectations for you and I if we want to patronize these establishments. And it's a way, if we're allowed to open up, how can we open up safely and give confidence to the public that if they're going out for a dining experience, that they're going to be able to do it as safe as they can. I think I forwarded you a copy of the Restaurant Association's promise outline. We're going to continue discussions with them, and there are some other things I think we can also do. The second paragraph of this letter talks about trying to add some provisions to expand what I'll call the footprint of license areas. And I had a discussion with City Attorney Lawrence and City Clerk Hubrick this morning, and we're looking at ways that we can present an ordinance for council's consideration that will allow us to work with all of our different licensees, and if they're interested in expanding beyond where their current footprint is into a larger area, that we give the temporary capability for this to happen. You see they put it into October 1. I think they're hoping for a nice early fall to keep it going, but obviously, we're in Wisconsin, weather affects everything. But we want to be able to work with them. And Mr. Davis and his staff have committed to, we will be out there working with individual businesses to make this happen. So if it gets released, and I think once the hospitality segment of the economy opens, once they're given authorization, we suspect that the state's going to say, okay, you can do it, and you guys at the city level figure it out. We want to figure it out now, not wait until we get the authorization. So what we plan to do is bring that forward. If this happens sooner rather than later, we may request a special meeting of the council to adopt this, or it would be an ordinance that would basically say temporarily we can do this. Once we have an idea, it might be very early next week. So I'll have Diane contact each of you to get a feel for your availability. It would only be this item on the agenda, but the idea would be that Ms. Lawrenson wants to make sure that we're covered legally, we're not violating any state laws, but things are a little, I think people are being a little more flexible these days. We want to make sure that we're following these rules, but giving restaurants and bars a temporary use permit to expand their footprint is one way where they can create greater social distance. So I wanted to get that on the agenda, or at least get it in your packet so that you're aware of it. We may be calling and requesting a special meeting. If you have any questions about this, I'd encourage you to read the restaurant promise and get an idea. If you have any questions, don't be afraid to call me. And I would bet that Mr. Larson, Ms. Albright, or Mr. Pertel with the Tavern League would probably be happy to field your calls as well.
I guess my question is, so what would be the need for a special meeting? Why would this not just go on the regular agenda?
Memorial Day weekend.
Ah.
I wanted to save that just for, again.
But the safer at home order doesn't lift until after that.
And that's very possible, and we'll be prepared for that. But if the Supreme Court comes out with something, we want to
Gotcha.
be prepared. We just want to be prepared for every possible scenario. You know, we might not have to come back until the 26th, but if the safer at home order is lifted on the 26th, and it's the 26th, I think people are going to say, well, why can't we do it now? Well, council has to approve an ordinance, so we'll probably want to bring it to you sooner just so that we're ready. And
So I'm
trying to
assuming
avoid
that
calls
would
for
be
you.
crafted in a way that relates to whatever the current order is.
Correct, and it would give us the capability to the degree we're given that, you know, that we're not denied the capability. I mean, the scenario could be, we're not changing this at all, the bars and restaurants are going to be closed. You and I know that from what we've heard, there'll be a lot of hoopla over that. We're trying to avoid that here, and we feel that this program will work if people follow it. The promise is a two-pronged. The restaurants and bars are going to promise, but we have to promise as customers that we're also going to behave properly, because if you see, like you saw in California where the beaches were overrun, if you start undoing too quickly what the chief talked about, well, then we got to go, as the mayor said, if we got to step backwards because we've done something stupid, we don't want to do that. We want to do something that is very thoughtful and careful.
Yeah, I think there was a case in Massachusetts of an ice cream store that reopened this week. And unfortunately, even though they asked for call-ahead orders and social distancing, the customers didn't comply and they had to shut down the same day.
I would have been one of those guilty parties, though. I have to just admit that.
Ice
so.
cream, is that what it is? Okay.
Leon's is open.
Yeah, Leon's is open. But that's what I have, so we'll be letting you know if we need a meeting and just gauge your availability for that. That's all I have, Madam Mayor, with the exception of, I want to end on a positive note. Last week was Public Service Appreciation Week, and our folks at Oshkosh Media put together about a 3-4 minute video of our employees talking about why they're public servants.
I serve because I want to make a difference in the community in which I live and work, and I also want to help grow and develop the employees to make the city a great place to live.
I serve because I have a passion for public service. I also feel very strongly that local government is the most direct form of government with the residents, the people, and we can have a direct and positive impact on people's lives.
I serve because I love being a part of this awesome community.
I chose to serve because I want to make a difference in people's lives, and the participants become family to me.
Prior to coming to the city of Oshkosh, I spent 31 years in the trucking industry, and as much as we valued our customers' freight, I find coming to the city, instead of transporting goods, I transport grandmas, kids to school. It's a big responsibility, and I come home every day proud that I do that for the city of Oshkosh.
I serve because I want to help the people in my community.
I serve because of the excitement of the job and the satisfaction I get helping people.
I've been in the service industry all my life. I've worked for the city of Oshkosh for 18 years and strive to keep the city neat and clean. I enjoy going to schools and teaching kids about recycling and garbage programs. I also enjoy on a daily basis seeing the kids' smiles when we're out on the roads.
Very nicely done.
That's all I have.
All right. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.